He's here. All right. Welcome to the Legislative Subcommittee meeting for today, Thursday, the 13th. All right. Jane, will you please take the roll?
Sure. Member Tucken?
Here.
Assistant Mayor Kelly?
Here.
Councilor Cook?
Here.
Councilor Flynn?
Here.
All right. Here we have the approval of the April 13th, 2026 minutes.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, on to the review and discussion of the NHMA's 2027 to 2020 proposed legislative policies and proposed legislative principles. So Jane, would you like to walk us through any of the, I guess the biggest changes are highlighted? They rejected our change?
They did. They did not accept the homestead exemption, and basically the overarching changes were about land use and local control, some parking stuff, big cannabis, change to the policy on cannabis, and citing solid waste in certain locations, and some environmental protections. So what I've done in the form is to highlight, the changes. So I'll just go topic by topic. So under general administration and governance, the local authority and efficiency, there's just adding towns to the first bullet under the policies that are supported by NHMA, and then the two bullets on the reform to the current welfare laws and the ability of members to establish and govern risk pools are new and are being added. So, I think there's been some changes about welfare laws most recently, sending and receiving, that's not the terminology I think that the legislature uses, but I think there's just been some discussions, let's say, about those types of laws that are coming forward. And so I think this policy is just obviously trying to loop in the state to fund some of these needs, basically because the understanding is that welfare from a local perspective should be temporary and transitory. So that is a change. And then the other change is the ability of members to establish and govern risk pools. And NHMA supports clear regulations that protect the members and allow the pools to operate. So as you well know, more than most communities, the issues relative to risk pools, and this, it made it to their policies to be, and this is in order, obviously, I should have said in the beginning, for those of you who might be new to this, the approval of these policies will then become final, and then NHMA can lobby on all of these things. So this will allow them to lobby in support of legislation that supports risk pools that are governed and protect their members. So and then the other new policy is in what the NHMA opposes, and that would be any new legislation requiring questions for a town's legislative body to be placed on an official ballot, and supports legislation repealing current laws that require such official ballot votes. I think we're finding that problematic when the legislation comes down requiring things be put on the ballot. HB 1300 is the school spending cap, and there are questions that are raised on that. So this policy opposes that practice in a general way. So given that we have discussed all the local authority and efficiency policies, it's probably easier if we go section by section to see if we would support the policies as presented.
Okay. So do we want to take up first the general administration and governance?
Yeah, so that was local authority and efficiency. So I'm wondering if you want to just do that or do the whole just do it piece by piece as we go through it?
So move to approve as presented. I'd second that.
Sure, that seems, I don't see any. And so that's just, are we just doing
That's
local authority?
just the local authority and, yeah, and I'll
Okay.
just run through.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
And then there are no changes to the following policies. Anything under the right to know laws, and these are the same as last year. Anything under election, there are no changes to that. There are no changes to labor and employment. And so those three are no changes. Maybe
Do I have a motion to approve as presented?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
And then the under substance use and prevention and response, it would be on top of page 4. This is a new change. So what they've done is they've discussed the cannabis or potential cannabis legislation and tried to flush out some of the issues that have come and gone through various iterations of bills. And so the principles as laid out here are what NHMA's membership is proposing to support as a group. We have not, the prior policies were just very, very brief and not well fleshed out. Again, it gives some municipalities, some authority to regulate and limit. It's requiring or requesting that there's funding, provided by the state to help, municipalities with some of these costs associated around the means by which these cannabis operations would work in a municipality. And then they're calling it host communities, but they are trying to allow communities some ability to fund. So there would support community impact fees. The NHMA is proposing supporting revenue sharing relating to cannabis sales. It's not specific where it says state or municipal here, so I might ask that of the NHMA. Secure particular standards for construction of the actual brick and mortar, traffic control, and provisions for business termination and compliance. So it's really kind of broadening, I think, some municipal control and oversight over potential brick and mortar retail establishments.
I have one question here. I think while this is an improvement to have this language, would this cause NHMA to lobby against legislation at the State House that was proposing cannabis sales at state stores, for example, which would not be regulated by municipalities? It would, if it was at a state store. I just know that that's one of the legislations that's been discussed. Mm-hmm. So I want to make sure that we don't get in a situation that NHMA is lobbying against legalization in New Hampshire because it's at a state store. That's the only legislation that gets through. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That's a good question. I'm reading this as geared towards local municipalities. I'm not seeing this. The only thing that we could infer from the language is the fact I think that if it's cited, then they're granting municipalities local control over it. But it's the revenue sharing that I question, because it's not clear, right? Whether it's the municipality or the state. I think for purposes of it applying to a municipality, then I think we should view it in terms of that alone. Mm-hmm. And that's a great question about whether, because they support this, they can't support a state and like the liquor stores having everything sold at the liquor stores.
Yeah, that was my only concern, is if that comes forward as legislation, it's better than where we are.
Sure,
So,
I don't think that,
you know.
geez, tough time for any meetings, I guess I should.
Yeah, I know, it is, isn't it?
But the,
It's not a normal time.
Siesta time.
But I don't think that this would prevent anybody from supporting that. I just don't know if NHMA would be supporting that legislation, but I don't think they would speak against, it doesn't sound like they would speak against the legislation that would place it in the state liquor stores.
I
Yeah,
think we'd
that's
see
what I
that
was-
under opposes, like would you potentially would see like opposes state-run
That's true.
operations
Yeah,
that
that's true. I
limit.
think they do have that. Okay,
Yeah, as long as they don't,
good
yeah,
question though.
just,
Right?
All right, so this one as presented, substance use prevention and response. So, we have a motion to support as presented.
So moved, Michelle.
second,
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right,
And then, for the following, finance and revenue, there are no changes to that. And then the only change to the state aid and non-property tax revenue section, which is in the middle of page 6, there's only one thing added, legislation that creates a mechanism to compensate host municipalities for costs generated by casino operations beyond what is covered by property tax payments. So that is the only new,
Wait, so what is this one?
on page 6. So when, under state aid and non-property
what-
tax
sorry.
revenue,
So did we move off of finance and revenue? Is this one that has been underlined? Has that been-
oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, yeah, finance and revenue, the one, moving back,
NHMA
the reason
opposes.
I underlined under opposes on page 5, this policy, which was a carryover from last year, Mayor, is the way I'm reading this, and I'll read to the group, it may limit a support of, let's say, a tax on second homes. So in reading this language, legislation that directly or indirectly increases or redistributes property taxes, including but not limited to new or expanded mandatory exemptions or credits or changes in the process for valuing, assessing, and taxing specific classes of properties. And I know, Mary, you've talked about current use and you've talked about, second homes, and I didn't know, thanks for checking, for noticing my underline, if we wanted to pull that out and not support that policy.
So how does this,
I'm sorry, they would
So they-
oppose that.
they oppose that?
Yes, so if we wanted to encourage
How does
them.
that square with the second thing that they,
The second one is keeping the current use program the way it is. Now that you can't shrink the 10-acre.
right, I guess
Yeah.
but how are these, and they're not here to defend it, but how are these, legislation that directly or indirectly increases or redistributes property taxes, including but not limited to, so all of that is what current use does.
Right, and they're not including current use in that. It's kind of like a pre-existing non-conforming, I think, if I'm thinking about it that way. They're keeping non-conforming uses as a separate category. But I think this is talking about new classes and treating, different types of valuation or assessing different types of properties. So commercial versus residential or resident. There was a lot of second home, taxation bills that came forward, and I didn't know if if this committee had an opinion on that to recommend to the council. If we do not, if you do not have an opinion on that,
Is this new?
no, this was last year's, but in rereading it, I flagged it.
Yeah.
yeah.
I would say this would prevent us from, or the state from ever having a homeowner's exemption, because that would indirectly raise the taxes of commercial property or non-resident property.
Depending on how they phrase that, homeowners, it could
Sure, yeah.
could impede that, yes.
Yeah, I don't like that language.
So, do you want to vote to oppose this policy? And when you bring it back to council, you will say that you would, at the conference, move to remove the policy, or in fact, don't vote in favor of it.
Sure. await that motion.
Move to accept the finance and revenue section, except for the first bullet under NHMA opposes, and register our opposition at the conference on this particular item.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thanks, Jane.
Great, okay. And then, moving back to what we just started to talk about was this casino operation. So they are supporting some way for the state to assist compensating a host municipality for costs for casinos. Beyond whatever they get collecting. But I don't know if they're gonna give them enabling legislation to, enact a new tax, or the state would then, I don't know the details, but,
Revenue sharing.
Pardon?
Revenue sharing of some sort.
yeah, maybe. And again, I wanted to flag that in case, any of the members had strong feelings about that one way or the other.
We don't allow casinos, so.
So we'd have no strong feelings. Okay.
And then services they provide, legislation that enhances the ability for ambulance and other emergency services to collect fees for the services they provide. They added that, services they might provide.
Yes, yep.
Okay.
And so I don't know if we want to, a motion on the state aid and non-property tax revenue section?
Wait, a motion to adopt as presented, or support as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay, great. And then for the New Hampshire retirement system, there are actually no changes. The reason I highlighted is that they used to have percentages of increases in that language. Now they just made it a generic, increasing the state's participation in the cost. I think they used to say return to 35%, which historically had been, but sometimes I think I'm assuming they didn't want to hamstring themselves to the percent, right? And limit that. So I think it's just a kind of a Scribner's, an edit, not anything substantively different. And so there was also no change to education funding. And so maybe we want to address those two. Retirement and education funding.
Okay, yep. Anything on? I'd wait a motion to support both the education funding and retirement system as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Moving on to infrastructure development and land use. There are two changes to what NHMA is opposing. And they are opposing any legislation that limits a municipality's ability to install and use renewable energy sources, including lowering caps or limiting net energy metering for municipal projects, and legislation that prohibits municipalities from adopting local environmental regulations, including but not limited to ordinances that protect environmentally sensitive lands. So they just expanded some of the things, under energy and expanded a municipality's local control relative to environmental regulations.
That's great. Yeah.
Okay?
We have a motion to support as presented.
So moved. So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
All right. There's no change to water resource protection, control, and management. Take that one.
Move to approve as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
And then in the solid waste management, there is a a new policy that NHMA is proposing that would support improving transparency and increasing municipalities' input and control relative to the siting of new or the expansion of existing landfills, recycling centers, and solid waste facilities. And then there's a new policy that they are supporting, that they would oppose legislation that limits a municipality's input and control relative to zoning and land use regulations in favor of state landfill, recycling centers, and solid waste facility siting requirements.
Makes sense. This is about the landfills up north?
Yeah.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Oh, I don't know if we
Wait,
had
is there a
motions
motion?
yet.
Wait, a motion to
Motion.
support as presented?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
So, the next topic is housing. And, on page 8 in the middle, there are 2 added policies that oppose, that NHMA would oppose in future legislation. One is, if the legislation, limits a municipality's ability to install and use renewable energy sources, including lowering caps or limiting net energy use.
No.
Wait a minute, no, sorry, flipped the wrong page. Housing, here we go. That's fine. There are no changes to housing, so I wanna take that one.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
This is the one where we
The local
had
control.
suggestions on local control and we lost. Can we?
Yes.
Can we come back and oppose that again?
Yes, so the underline is sort of the things that I think, yeah, it deals with, again, that struggle of local control. So the question I think would be for this committee and the council, whether they would want to remove its support for that statement. Because this statement's broad, you know,
It is.
legislation that erodes local control over land use decisions. Later on, there are more pointed policies relative to construction and zoning in the next section under land use. But this does in fact flag, you know, they would oppose legislation that erodes local control over land use decisions. So I think if we're gonna do what we did last year and say relative to housing, we oppose these types of mandates opposing statewide zoning changes. And we'll get to that in the next section, but last time we did that.
Yeah, that's what I personally would like to do, and the reason I say that is that we wouldn't have had the statewide ADU laws.
Right.
We wouldn't have had the reductions in parking requirements that came from the state. If we blatantly oppose changes around housing, and NHMA did come out in opposition to those.
They did.
State House and lobbied against
They
those
did.
changes, so.
Mhm. So you want to, the same as the last policy that was with, you said you want to register, register in opposition?
Yeah.
Okay, so you want to. Do you want to say oppose this policy? I mean, it's double oppose.
Yeah, register opposition to this,
Okay.
this policy.
Register in opposition of this policy, okay?
Imagine we're not the only ones.
Well, I think, yes, I don't think so, that this is now becoming an issue. So the motion first. That's yours, right, you moved it, so that's.
I'm gonna move to approve the housing section with a provision that we register opposition to the last item under the NHMA opposes section.
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Okay.
Any opposed?
Okay. And then land use, this is where this issue comes up most frequently. So what is new under supports and land use is the bottom of page 10, legislation that ensures the state compensates municipalities for the cost of statewide land use mandates on public infrastructure and resources. So that's new this year. Going to the top of page 11, increase local control over parking requirements for new development, including residential, and increase state investment in public parking infrastructure. The other new policy is supporting increased local control over the implementation of statewide land use mandates. And the last policy is legislation enabling municipalities to conditionally amend their zoning ordinance or other applicable local regulations after a public hearing to promptly and only address statewide land use mandates that have been signed into law, rather than waiting to place zoning amendments on the official ballot for a vote at the next annual meeting. So that's really a town issue, but they are streamlining it, and it would have been interesting if they had added language relative to cities, but then that would be a violation of how we approve ordinances in our charter. So those are more kind of neutral in terms of the mostly other than the local control over the new development, including residential, and the local control over implementing the statewide. So I don't know if the committee has concerns with the top two bullets on page 11.
I have a question, the one on page 10 even, the idea that the state is gonna compensate municipalities for the cost of land use mandates on public infrastructure and
Right.
resources. I just, I'm struggling a little bit with that
Mhm.
because currently we make those decisions, we have not lost any kind of local control over making decisions about public infrastructure and resources when it comes to zoning. And so it doesn't make sense for the state then to turn around and compensate people for infrastructure and resources. So there's still a TAC process, and municipalities and towns can engage in that as well. It's not, I don't see where the state would need to compensate a municipality.
If I were to guess why this is here, I'm wondering if towns are saying, we can't build because we don't have sewer. We can't allow more housing because we can't have sewer. We can't allow more housing because we don't have water. And I'm just wondering if this is added as a means by which they could request monies from the state for infrastructure that supports housing. I don't know that for a fact. I'm totally guessing. But I'm wondering if that is some of the pushback that NHMA was hearing relative to why housing can't be constructed, and by putting this policy in, perhaps more housing could be built. Again, this is without any factual research whatsoever.
Sure,
It's just-
I mean, I think that it's whether or not housing costs more to a municipality, like and I don't know if they have like a TAC process or like they would
Right.
likely, you know,
Right.
cause a lot of places that are not here that don't have a tax process, would just, assess an impact fee on that, so like if you, it would be, I mean, I don't think the state is gonna compensate them, I mean, it's in there, I don't think they're gonna listen and come up with money for that. They'll say, hey, charge the people that wanna build it.
Right.
But I think that if there's I'm guessing this is in here because people are afraid of the costs that are gonna be put on there, even if they are in control of those costs. So I don't necessarily think that we need to pull it out, but I also think it's never, ever gonna happen. But I'm sure there's a couple of things in here that we're never, ever getting back together. So,
That's kind of where I was like, I don't see how this happens, but I don't like the language around more local control over statewide requirements, specifically with parking and residential. And local control over implementation of statewide land use. We already have those things. Asking for more local control is basically asking to ignore the state mandates. I think in both of these cases, I think that that's really what the lobbying is for, to lobby to say, can we ignore these mandates if we are a town under a certain size, or if we are, which is what I've heard is the request, is that if you're a town under a certain population, then you shouldn't be beholden to these statewide mandates. Which directly impacts us because it means some of our neighboring towns do not have to abide by mandates. So, on land use, which I think is very challenging. It creates kind of a two-tier system where some towns, like I can think of one locally that has a 3-acre minimum for housing starts, right? So they get to keep that because their population is low. And then communities like ours can't. I don't think that that's a reasonable adaptation.
So would you,
I oppose those 2 bullets in the language. The increased local control. I mean, this is coming from the same place the last one came from. Is bullet, what is it, 2 and, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6.
So increased local control over parking requirements for new development, including residential, and increased state investment in public parking infrastructure.
I like the state investment in the public parking infrastructure. We could amend it to say increased state investment in public parking infrastructure. But it's this local control over parking requirements for new development, including residential. This is a response to that legislation that required a reduction in
to one
parking
space?
spots per unit. Yeah. So that towns can require 2, 3, or 4 and thereby limit the number of apartments that they build.
Would they be able to do that under the current law, though? I mean, I guess like,
Current law is only 1. You can only require 1 parking spot per unit now,
yes,
state law, right? So my concern is this is a way to get around that so that they can require more and limit housing development. Not so they can require less.
sure, but how would they require more under the increase? I mean, I just feel like this is like a nothing, like they're not gonna be able to do anything with this, but what could they do with this in your mind?
I think that what they'll come in with, and one of our neighboring towns has asked for this, is that relief from the changes in the land use code if you're a town under a population of 10,000.
Okay.
So that they don't have to abide by any of these land use changes. And so they can continue to have requirements that limit housing development. That's what I'm concerned about, is that we're going to be put in a situation that we're the only ones that have to abide by the law, state law. And it's the same for the next one, for number 6 too, increased local over implementation. So you have a state mandate, but it doesn't apply here because we're gonna just grandfather everyone in.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I don't know what those are, I don't know they seem like state mandates, and I don't know how they're gonna be applied differently, but yeah, I think that state mandate should be applied evenly across, all municipalities, if it's gonna be a state mandate.
It's just one of our neighboring towns specifically asked for legislation to have the state mandates not apply to them.
Okay.
That's where I see this coming from, but maybe I'm wrong. I like local control on how we implement things, but at the same time, if that allows others to not implement them, it's a little different.
Creating a loophole or giving the ability of NHMA to lobby
Yes.
new legislation. I think that's what it could open the door for.
Yeah, that's my concern.
Yeah.
Okay, so it would be to strike the changes or all changes or just,
Just 5 and 6, but we haven't gotten to the opposes section yet, so I don't know.
Yeah, maybe we want to talk about that before there's a motion. Yeah, and so again, this is where it really becomes more plain. NHMA would oppose legislation that limits municipal control in implementing statewide priorities in zoning and land use regulations. And then the second bullet under opposition on the top of page 11, it would oppose new state mandates requiring municipalities to allow specific types of housing. And it would oppose the third bullet, legislation and policies. This is new, okay? The underlined were carryovers from last year. But this new one is NHMA would oppose legislation and policies that limit municipalities' ability to regulate building code, inspections, and enforcement. And the last bullet under NHMA opposes is all other statewide land use mandates. So that is the strong statement of the NHMA's policies that we kind of bump up against sometimes when we're talking about bills relative to housing.
any thoughts on the additional ones? So, what did we do last time? Did we support or oppose this?
I think we, I don't know if it was this language in particular, but I do believe we pulled out two statements or for 2 to 4 relative to this topic. I believe 2 years ago, this was the issue that we pulled out.
Okay, I mean, I guess my thoughts on this are, if the state mandates are mandates, then support them as provided that everybody has to do the same thing. I think that these are speaking to state mandates that I would imagine wouldn't just apply to Rye or Newcastle, but would apply to everyone, meaning that we would all have the same local control over these, and it's probably the fastest way to get these state mandates in there. That said, I could go either way on this one. It just seems like a way to water down state mandates, but I don't know, like, it seems like the state mandates are gonna pass or not pass, and yeah, I don't know. I would rather just have better state mandates than have, things that are going to, like, we're gonna end up. Yeah, I guess that's where I feel on this, like, rather to have better state mandates that, we can get across versus state mandates that are going to be interpreted by every different town, with whatever's gonna make those different municipalities happy enough to support them. I think that should be done in the mandate level rather than the individual application. So I guess we could oppose the, what's 4 and 5 of that, right? Or 5 and 6? And then legislation and policies that limit municipalities' ability to regulate building codes.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and I think that is in response to the changes for both the fire and the building code, the inability to amend those codes, and third-party inspections. But I can say, and you heard Shanti and
Yeah.
for chapter 12, I think he feels it's an improvement in some respects insofar as there's more uniformity, and that the board itself, the board, Building Code Board of Reviews, is, doing this statewide. But I do understand, there are some municipalities that have particular amendments that they were able to make, and I don't know if that board has rejected some of these administrative amendments now. You basically can't substantively change the code, so
I don't know. I guess I'm opposed to that one because it seems like we should just have a state building code, just have the things go through the state building code, and Shanti seems okay with it now, so I feel like we can be okay with just having a state building code, and if we want changes to the building code, we can recommend those and they can go through that process, but it's easier for builders to have one, set of rules. That seems pretty fair.
And so am I hearing from the group that the 4 bullets under opposition would be would there be a motion to remove at the policy conference? Is that an accurate characterization of the 4 bullets under opposition?
Definitely the last 3 in my book, but that's because I don't mind some of the statewide housing mandates and land use mandates.
I mean, the other 3 ones are already in there,
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would say they're not coming out from this, but we can oppose them. But I would try to
I see what you're saying.
I would try to get the 3rd one out of there,
Mhm.
and then,
Yeah, we were not successful 2 years ago. Remember?
maybe just for our sake and for Counselor Cook, we just vote on the ones that we support out of here, and oppose, wait a motion of the items under NHMA supports and oppose that we oppose.
Do you want me to say, move to support land use items 1 through 4 and item 7 under NHMA supports? That's it.
Okay. And let's just get the same for and nothing under oppose.
Nothing under opposes.
We do not support any under oppose, or
I don't
we are
like
not
any of them,
taking
but I mean, I personally would, but I don't know where everyone else is.
I would just, for the purposes of this one, just oppose the new one that we have there.
That just means they're gonna lobby against every statewide zoning mandate for housing.
Yeah, they will. We can just, what was the motion before?
Just to approve the items 1 through 4 and 7 under
Okay.
supports and just leave the opposes
Sure, all
ones just come in and I'm happy to present the new one first, to try to get it out first.
Okay. Great.
And so is it just pulling out the 3rd in opposed and leaving the others in? Is that
We're not
right?
gonna support any
Not
of
gonna
those.
support any of the ones.
All of these are not supported?
Yeah.
Okay,
but-
so, yeah,
So I will make sure we approach it but by opposing the new language first. Trying to get it out first.
thank you.
Second.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
There is only one minor change for information technology, and that is on the top of page 12, the second bullet under oppose, legislation that limits municipalities' ability to prevent or regulate deployment of technologies that would interfere with the management of the right-of-way.
What is that?
I don't know, to be quite honest with you. I don't know if there are certain technologies that impact streets and roads, physically impact a right-of-way, and I don't know,
It seems so specific.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
With the management of the right of way.
It's
Technology.
under cyber? I mean,
Is it the camera thing, you think?
Yeah, I don't
The
know.
flock cams.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's so imprecise. It's very hard to know to support or oppose it, because it doesn't give you any information about what ability to prevent or regulate deployment, that's an interesting word, of technologies that would interfere with management of right-of-ways. I don't know.
the only
I don't know if
technology
it's
I can
drones
think
or-
of is when they put down the strips the police put down strips, but that's not really cyber security and technology.
I don't know if it's drones, I don't know if it's those cameras, I don't know if they're trying to get at that without saying it.
Yeah.
I do not know.
Was there any information provided?
No.
And do these three bullets, is this how they're coupled in their documentation?
Yeah,
They're
this
all
is
there
what the
together.
slate will,
Okay.
yeah, it will definitely come forward as is presented to you right now.
Limits municipalities' ability to prevent or interfere with the management of the right of way. Is these cell phone towers?
Oh, maybe
Limits municipalities' ability to prevent or regulate.
deployment of technology.
The state has control over it.
I just feel like this seems like, I mean, I would not want it if it means that like we can't have cell phone towers in neighboring towns,
But you may want it on the camera issue, right? It's really hard to know, though.
Yeah.
Like I can't, and
Yep.
these are, as you remember, different committees are formed, they collect information, they make these amendments. I honestly, I don't know the specifics of what they're trying to get at.
so what do we do when we don't know the specifics?
Don't vote on it. Take no position.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll just move to take no position on that, on the second bullet.
No needed. Great. I'll try to get more info. Move to support the information technology, communications, and cybersecurity section while taking no position on the second item under NHMA opposes.
A second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay, transportation, there's only one change, adequate funding for the maintenance and development of the state turnpike system. That is a new policy that NHMA supports. And there are no changes to the economic development, recovery, and vitality section.
Move to approve the last two sections I've presented.
A second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
And now moving on to the principles, there are no changes from last year, except the last one is new, number 13. support municipalities' ability to readopt state laws that are local options that the state has modified rather than the changes being mandated.
Oh. Huh.
What does that mean?
Well, if it didn't say that are local options, that's interesting. That the state has modified rather than the changes being mandated. Again, challenging drafting here to understand the policy that they may be trying to get at. I think I'm reading it, that it's local option, an ability for a state mandate to be passed by local option rather than amending ordinances consistent with the mandate. But I have no tea leaves to read into this. I guess this language might support NHMA taking those positions on legislation. And I don't think this is clear at all.
Because, well, what's confusing is that their ability to readopt state laws that are local options.
They're not local options if they're mandated.
That's right. If it's been changed,
Right.
how is it a local option anymore?
Right,
I mean, it'd be one thing if it said go back to prior
exactly, yeah.
law, right?
I just don't think this is drafted appropriately. I would probably not take a position on it.
Okay. I'd write a motion to adopt legislative principles 1 through 12.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right.
That's all I have.
Any old business? We'll get done on time. All right, thank you, Jane. I'd write a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.